1,000 better
1,000
stories.
better
1,000 better stories.
1,000 better stories.
You're listening to 1,000 Better Stories, the Scottish Communities Climate Action Network's podcast sharing stories of community-led climate action in Scotland to help us all imagine the better and fairer future and transform what we think is possible. Hello, it's Kashka, your story weaver. As you may have heard, we're taking it slow right now as we wait to hear about our continuing funding. If you find this channel useful and if you can spare a few pennies, we would really appreciate your donation through our Ko-fi account. It will help us cover the basic podcasting subscription costs to keep us going and secure a future for 1,000 Better Stories. You can donate at ko-fi.com/1000 Better Stories Pod. That's 1,000 Better Stories. One word. I've popped the link into the episode notes along with other resources. While we take a pause on our own production, we're delighted to be able to share the wonderful work on climate-related topics done by other Scottish podcasters out there and help them build their own audiences too. Today we'll hear an inaugural episode of Paperboats podcast hosted by Ian Grosz. I'll let him introduce the story.
Welcome to the Paperboats podcast. My name's Ian Grosz. I'm a researcher and writer, and like many people, I'm concerned about our deepening environmental crises. In each episode of this podcast, I'll be meeting with a different writer from the Paperboats collective. We'll discuss their work and the issues that they write about. Paperboats are a group of writers from across Scotland and beyond, inspired by Kathleen Jamie's poetic response to COP26. They're working together to highlight the impacts of climate change, the ecological collapse we are witness to, and the things we can do to help bring about positive change. If you're concerned about climate change, want to delve further into the issues surrounding it, and like great writing, follow and subscribe to the Paperboats podcast to hear from a host of fantastic nature writers. Well, hello and thanks for joining us for this first ever episode of the Paperboats podcast. And with me today are two of the Paperboats writers, co-founders, Sandy Winterbottom and Elaine Morrison. Hello.
Hello.
How are you doing? That was very good in unison. So I'll just introduce you to our listeners. Sandy spent most of her career as an academic, teaching and researching in the environmental sciences and working in the renewables industry. She then went on to complete the Creative Writing Master's Programme at Stirling University in 2020 and is the author of The Two-Headed Whale, published by Berlin and Greystone, and nominated for the Saltire Society First Book of the Year Award in 2023. And that's a great read. I can personally attest to that. So if you haven't read it, go out and find it because it's a really powerful book. Elaine is a teacher and a writer and an independent researcher. She has an MSc in Energy and Environment and graduated with an MLit in Scottish Literature and Creative Writing, also from Stirling University in 2020, where the two met. Elaine is currently writing a creative non-fiction book about her journeys with the poetry of Helen B. Cruikshank. So a good place to start then is the beginning in Kathleen Jamie's poem, what the Clyde said after COP26. And I know it's been really inspirational for the two of you and the Paperboats movement more widely. So for listeners that aren't familiar with the poem or haven't even, perhaps not heard it before, we'll just take a moment now to listen to that, and it's read by Kathleen Jamie herself.
What the Clyde said after COP26. I keep the heed. I'm cool. If asked, but you never ask, I'd answer in tongues hinting of lins, of leavin, nethin, kelvin, cart, but neutral, balancing both banks equally as I flow. Do I judge? I mind the hammer swing, the welder's flash, the heavy steel-built hulls I bore downstream from my city. And maybe I was a bletherskite then, a wee bit full of myself, when we seemed gae near unstoppable. But how can I stomach any more of these storm rains? How can I slip quietly away to meet my lover, the wide-armed ocean, knowing I'm a poisoned chalice you must drain, drinking everything you chuck away? So these days I'm a listener, aye. Think of me as a long, level, liquid ear gliding slowly by. I heard the world's words, the pleas of peoples born where my ships once sailed. I heard the beautiful promises. And sure, I'm a river, but I can take a side. From this day I'd rather keep afloat like wee folded paper boats, the hopes of the young folk chanting at my bank, fear in their spring bright eyes. So hear this, fail them and I will rise.
Really evocative imagery in that poem, and a perfect metaphor, really. But I wondered if you could talk us through how that inspired you, how it translated into the formation of the Paperboats collective, and that sort of galvanised into the action that sort of followed that.
Sure. Yeah. So way back at the beginning of Paperboats, which feels like a very, very long time ago, but actually it was just 18 months ago. Mm-hmm. It's astonishing. We feel like we've been together forever. But on that sort of Dreich January day, a group of us who had some kind of association with the University of Stirling were brought together by the poet Chris Pavici. I hope I've said his name correctly, Chris. I'm really sorry if I haven't. But Chris brought us together at Stirling, and there must have been about 25 of us at the time. Yep. Yeah. Some of us knew each other because we'd been on the master's course together, but
this is all students that were doing the...
Not necessarily students, no. There were people who had, not necessarily students on the master's course, but the people who'd maybe done their undergraduate degree there. Right. So Tom Bowser, for example, he did his undergrad there.
Okay.
And I think Rebecca Smith had done her undergrad there as well, and people who had been, for example, writers in residence or had contributed to the teaching on the course. So it was a really sort of wide range of people who were sort of mostly established writers, but some of us, a bit like me, were just sort of setting out on the writing journey. So we all got together and, had some nice we didn't have cake, actually, thinking about it. That was the problem, wasn't it? We didn't have cake. But we had some nice sort of vegan sandwiches and things like that. And we all kind of chatted about what we could do collectively to support and promote nature writing, or writing about nature in Scotland. And, there's loads of stuff out there. People are doing it all over the place. There's various sort of journals and whatnot dedicated to nature writing. But we had a sense that we wanted to do something that was a wee bit different. We wanted to focus on Scotland, and we wanted to focus on solutions. We wanted something that would offer a bit of hope, a bit of positivity. But also a sense that we needed to do something that was a bit more radical than just producing nice writing.
Right, so that's where the idea...
And that's kind of where the idea sort of began to form. So we kind of looked at a whole range of different things we could do together. We thought about publications, we thought about events, festivals and so on. And we kind of went away not really sure what we were going to do. And the thing that kind of sort of galvanised us really was, we were looking for some kind of name for the group. Mm-hmm. We were sort of tying with Corvus, wasn't it? We were thinking Corvids. We were thinking about crows.
Well, we started as vermin, didn't we?
We started at vermin. That's right. That was, and then we sort of, and then we became Corvids, and we kind of ended up sort of thinking, Kathleen's poem, which you've just heard there. The paper boat for us became a kind of a symbol. Yeah. It was something that was kind of both fragile and offering hope at the same time. Yeah, and we kind of latched onto that. I thought, let's just call ourselves Paperboats. So we ended up launching at the Edinburgh International Book Festival in 2023, surrounded by all the controversy of the Edinburgh International Book Festival. But while we were there, we were folding paper boats with people passing by, engaging in nuanced conversations about the climate crisis. And we discovered that the paper boat symbol really kind of captured people's imaginations, and it's kind of just grown from there.
Right. And you ran a campaign last year, didn't you, to deliver 1,000 paper boats to the Scottish Parliament. Can you tell us about that one, or both of you? Or
Yeah, so after the Edinburgh Book Festival, we sort of got Paperboat crazy, really, and we decided it had to be infectious. So we were getting folk from all over Scotland. We ran a social media campaign. We were working through the Scottish Libraries Association, and we were getting people folding paper boats all over Scotland and sending them down to us.
Fantastic.
And then we kind of had an idea for the campaign just before COP last year. And we had an event at the Scottish Parliament, well, the ponds outside the Scottish Parliament. So the idea was 1,000 paper boats, 1,000 hopes for the climate crisis. And we had well in excess of 1,000 paper boats. We had a giant paper boat made, and we floated them on the ponds in front of Scottish Parliament. Karine Polwart had a choir. We had a sort of scratch choir, and she'd composed a new song for it. And it was all beautiful and well attended. Except for our MSPs. I think only 2 of them bothered to actually come out and see us that day, and we had timed it so that they would be in Parliament, that there weren't any committees sitting. We timed it all perfectly. Only 2 bothered to come out and see us, which was hugely disappointing.
Did you directly invite them, or you were just there?
Yeah, no, Sandy, you'd written letters to them all, yeah?
Yeah, everyone was contacted by email or by letter to come and see us. It's a tricky one to get MSPs to come out and talk to you. They are busy, but we were there all day, so they could have popped out. But I think that's a sign of how much they're ignoring this crisis now. I mean, I've been involved in quite a lot of campaigns outside the Parliament, and rarely do they come out and engage with us. Sometimes it just feels like the climate activism is just background noise to them. So.
Do you think, despite that sort of poor engagement by MSPs, do you think that's why the Paperboats idea has really started to capture people's imagination? Because it is a little bit different. It's not so disruptive. It's positive, and it does capture imaginations. Do you think that's part of its growing success?
I think people are really desperate to do something or to know what to do. It's not for everybody to sit on a motorway or scale a bridge and drop a banner or create disruption. And although I think there is room for that, we're in an emergency and nobody seems to be acting like there's an emergency. But it's not tactics that I personally particularly want to use. But then where does that leave you if you're in that kind of middle ground where you don't want to cause disruption, but you do want to have your voice heard? And I think that was kind of what we hoped for Paperboats.
Yeah, definitely.
Was that it would give people that middle ground to have their voice heard.
Perfect. Yeah. So you were talking about people making paper boats across Scotland. Where did they come from? Were they?
They were from libraries themselves. We gave out instructions for how to set up a paper boat yard.
Right.
So that was happening across libraries, community centres, schools.
Fantastic. Yeah.
And so on. And so it came from a wide range of groups, really. And
so the hopes of young people, literally the hopes of young people, wrapped up in these little symbols of hope floating outside Parliament.
One of the things that we asked people to do when they were making their paper boats was to either write on them or add a little message on a piece of paper and tuck it into the boat. So we ended up collecting messages of climate hopes from over around 1,000 people across Scotland, which was a really good kind of indicator of what people really wanted.
Yeah, it's great that you had that uptake.
Yeah, no, it was really wonderful, actually.
And then were they subsequently delivered to MSPs in the form of?
I mean, because the MSPs didn't come out to meet us, and actually what we ended up having to do, because we got so many, it was almost like we were a victim of our own success in a way, in that we ended up having to just sort through them and sort them by postcode so that they went to the right MSP. So what we did a couple of weeks later, we took the whole batch of them and delivered them directly to Parliament. But in the meantime, what we also did was catalogue all the messages that had come through. Yeah, they were really important.
They were, and we've got those on the website actually as well, that people can go have a look and see what some of those messages were.
Great. And in terms of the writers you have involved, that's growing a growing movement as well, isn't it? There's how many writers would you say directly or indirectly sort of supporting the Paperboat
I think we've got a core group of about maybe 20 thereabouts.
Yeah, 20 or 30, I think.
20 or 30. It's hard to tell
depends who's
sometimes.
active.
At what particular day of the week, But yeah, we've got a core group of about 20 to 30, which is where we started. But some of those people are different people from where we started. So as I said, we started off with Folkhood in association with the University of Stirling, but that has widened and is now anyone who has an interest in writing and climate is welcome to sort of take part. You know, it is a collective. It's very loose. It's very informal, and it's very much there for anyone who's interested in engaging. One of the ways that we bring new writers in is through the zine.
Yes.
So obviously, as writers, we had to do something that was writing related as well as just activism. But actually, we see writing as activism. It's words are incredibly powerful things, and it's our job as writers to kind of go beyond sort of just noticing, but to actually sort of really reflect on what's happening to nature, what's happening in terms of the climate crisis, and use our words as a way of getting the message out there that we need to take action. So we launched an online magazine, again, which is on the website, and we're currently on our 4th call for submissions to that, and we're getting absolutely loads of submissions. It's really growing in momentum. It's fantastic. And that's there. It's open for anyone to read. There's no fees for anyone to sort of purchase anything to read it. It's all there, and we want to try and reach as wide an audience as possible, rather than just us reading our own writing. We want the public to engage in this as well, because the words that are being written are powerful, and they give us a sense of the urgency of the situation we're in, but they also do give us hope. And I keep returning to the word hope, and I know Sandy's not that keen on the word hope, which we'll come on to.
We will come on to that. Yeah.
But I think it is good that if there are solutions that are out there, or things that people are doing to tackle the climate crisis, then we need to talk about those.
Yes,
it's not a completely lost cause. We have got a chance to stop the sort of runaway sort of feedback loops associated with climate change, but we need to do it now. We don't have any more time. If we don't do it now, then it's not going to happen.
Yeah, we've already exceeded 1.5 degrees.
Yeah,
haven't we,
exactly. I mean, it's horrendous.
Temporary, but a very worrying, well, more than worrying.
Absolutely,
indicator.
Yeah.
So, Sandy, I wondered if you could talk through some of the campaigns that Paperboats is supporting right now, because we've moved on from that. I think the paperboat making is still a thing in workshops that you run, but I know that the campaigns that you support have sort of broadened out. Can you talk a little bit about that and why they're important?
Maybe? Certainly. So when we ran the 1,000 Paperboats, 1,000 Climate Hopes campaign last year, and catalogued the messages, there were 2 things that came out of it really, really clearly. And the first was that people wanted an end to oil and gas. They wanted a fair transition. They wanted green jobs, and to really a rapid shift away from the fossil fuel era, and to do that in a really fair way. And then we had a lot of messages from kids as well, because we'd been working with schools, and kids just wanted nature. They wanted trees, they wanted animals and wildlife and squirrels and badgers and all the things kind of things that you would expect kids to want. So we kind of took on board these messages, and we're quite small. We're not big enough to run our own campaigns, but we thought, well, we have a vehicle here. What campaigns could we back? And so, in terms of the for the kids for the future, we're backing the Scottish Rewilding Alliance campaign for the Rewilding Nation Charter, and that's really about restoring Scotland's natural habitats. We like to think of Scotland as a very wild and natural place, but actually
that's the strange irony of it, isn't it?
It is, and we actually live in one of the most nature depleted countries on the planet, really.
I was reading yesterday we've lost 80% of our butterfly species while I've been alive. 80%.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a huge buddleia in my garden, and every year it's in flurries of butterflies, and I've seen one this year. It's really deeply
been
depressing.
A very cool, wet summer, but yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So the Rewilding Nation Charter, I think, is a really important one to back. It's not just about having lovely nature to look at and go out and walk in. It's about jobs in rural areas as well, and wildlife for people. But it's also about climate resilience. We know that if we're planting Sitka spruce plantations endlessly, they're now a huge fire risk.
Yeah.
Whereas native woodland, somebody said the other day, it burns like wet asbestos. So part of reforesting with native woodland is about climate resilience. It stops flooding. So I think that's a really important campaign.
Sorry to interrupt, but can you just tell me? You're saying that that rewilding movement, which is a flag for some people, I think, but it helps generate jobs. In what ways? Just through the management of the land, jobs within the rural management.
Yeah. I mean, it actually takes a huge number of jobs, and there's been studies done, and I'm not the expert on it, but it does create rural jobs. We have a huge problem in Scotland with this kind of whole gentrification of the countryside, and big companies wanting to come in and buy up land and make flamingo farms or whatever.
I don't know. Yeah,
they want to do.
Well, take lots of government money to plant trees, actually, and then just kind of cream it off to the shareholders.
Yes, and the wrong type of trees.
Exactly,
well.
and prevent access to it, and so on.
In the name of
nature recovery. Absolutely.
But this isn't that.
It's not.
But if you're properly restoring nature, and I know rewilding is a bit of a term that people don't necessarily like, but this is about nature restoration.
Yes.
And it's quite intensive in terms of the time and the energy that it takes, and those are good quality jobs. Who wouldn't want to be out working in those kind of jobs? Well, I know some people wouldn't, but these are we've basically
includes management. And,
exactly.
It's at all levels, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean we've almost cleared our countryside of people because a lot of the work in the countryside has been mechanised, and actually what we really want is to bring people back, and that's what restoring nature does.
Yeah, so it's not a case of cordoning off huge tracts of land where people aren't allowed because of the impact. It's more about repopulating the rural landscape that for people, but alongside nature.
And nature tourism as well, because we're in a mental health crisis as well, and nature is one of the great solutions to that. If we can get people out and about in the countryside,
and if that's managed, because that's a different debate, I suppose. But
that's
also
a whole different
impact
debate.
of COVID, etc. But
again, that it involves people and management and tour guides and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think it basically the Rewilding Nation sort of charter and the sort of the plans here isn't about excluding people. It's accepting the fact and recognising the fact that we are actually part of nature. We can't be sort of separated out from it. And that we're not the most important part of nature. So we need to sort of look at how we can do things in a way that sort of benefits all of nature, not just humans exploiting it for their own good.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, just to level up the rights.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of our rights and
the rights of nature.
As a whole.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what does the Charter look to do specifically in terms of legislation or?
It's basically a charter to ask the Scottish Government, and people can go and sign this on the website rewild.scot, and it's basically to call on the Scottish Government to commit to restoring 30% of our nature in our land, across our land and sea as well.
Yes, great. It's only about 2% at the moment that's conserved even, let alone in restoration.
Absolutely.
That sounds great. And what was the other campaign?
So the other campaign, and this is one that's probably very close to my heart, is the Fossil Fuel Treaty, or to give it its full name, the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. I actually managed to say it time.
Well done.
Which is why we always call it the Fossil Fuel Treaty usually. Yeah. And this is a campaign by Global Justice Now, and one of the things is that, you know, there's a lot of brilliant climate action going on in Scotland on community levels. But we need to be tackling climate change on 3 levels. And the first is community action and climate resilience. And that's what we're doing really well. The second is in fossil fuel finance. We need to stop making oil and gas profitable, otherwise it's never going to stop. And the third thing is the political pressure for it to stop.
Mm-hmm.
So
policy change.
Absolutely. So we need to be active on these 3 fronts, but in particular we need to turn off the gas taps. We need to turn off the oil and gas taps. At the moment, what's happening is that fossil fuel production is increasing globally when it should be decreasing. We should have kind of gone over that hump now and into a transition.
Yeah.
Any gains that we've made from renewables have actually been taken up by increased consumption.
Well, that's not actually probably not the general perception, is it? I think the general perception is that all this renewable energy, the increase in renewable energy, is all doing a marvellous job at offsetting everything, and in fact.
Absolutely, and it's just being used for increased consumption, and things like AI are only going to increase energy consumption
and water consumption.
Yeah, so governments have not been that active in reducing consumption. Again, not profitable, and our energy companies are not, as of yet, state owned. So we need something. There's a whole gap in legislating on fossil fuel production. So all the COP meetings have been focused on emissions, which again are still going up, so it's still failing. But there is nothing that's
globally
focused.
Globally.
Yeah. So there is nothing that is tackling production. And so the fossil fuel treaty, the treaty itself, it doesn't exist yet, but it is being called for by the call's being led by 7 Pacific Island nations who've been the first and worst hit by climate change. It's now backed by Colombia, it's backed by the EU, it's backed by cities like Edinburgh, Birmingham, Brighton, London. So there's a growing call for this fossil fuel treaty, and it has basically 3 pillars, which is a worldwide moratorium on new oil and gas, so no new oil exploration.
Yeah.
We don't need any more oil. We have more than enough to see us through a transition. We can't even burn the oil and gas that we've got without really superheating our planet.
It's about committing them. I mean, there's a lot of talk about a transition. There's been a lot of talk about a transition for a long time, but without a treaty like this, there's no commitment to it.
There's no. And the talk has all been about emissions, and actually they fail, but there's never been a talk about reducing production, and that means legislating against things like new oil and gas licenses. Why are we even issuing new oil and gas licenses? It's ridiculous. But we also need to phase out existing production, so we can't even burn what we've already got.
To stay within the Paris.
Yeah, to stay within the Paris Agreement, the 1.5, and as you alluded to, we've kind of breached that temporarily, and we've seen the kind of world that 1.5 degrees brings us. So we've got wildfires right across Canada now, which are horrendous, and but for a wee kink in the jet stream, that could be us any summer now.
So you're talking there about the fossil fuel treaty, and I've been having a look at that, and a big part of that is climate justice and a just transition. And I wondered how that looks, how you understand it on the global level, and also particularly for places like Aberdeen that are obviously so centred on the oil industry, and there's so many families, so many people dependent on that income, with perhaps not obvious opportunity to go into something else, and might be really worried about the licenses being removed to stop exploration, things like that. How would you address that or think about that?
It's a really good question, and I completely understand people's concerns. The thing is, oil and gas have to stop. There's absolutely no doubt about that. We're burning our planet, and there's absolutely no argument about that now. So we have to stop oil and gas. We already have enough oil and gas to last us through a transition. So it will end, and sooner or later those people who are in those kind of jobs will find themselves either out of work or in different jobs. So the key thing is planning. The government knows this is going to happen. The Scottish government, the UK government knows that fossil fuels is going to have to come to an end, but they need to plan for it, and that means training people into new, good quality jobs that can deliver the same kind of benefits for people, and they can. We need energy. We 100% need energy. It's just about where it comes from. So the sooner we transition now, the better. Don't imagine that the oil companies themselves are going to be retraining people or paying for people to be retrained. They'll just cut and run. As soon as their licenses are shut off, they're going to cut.
They already are from Aberdeen, yes.
Are they? Yeah.
There's lots of empty
So that's a
offices.
failure on the government's part to either legislate for a fair transition, or to plan for a fair transition.
And we did this before when the oil and gas sector here in Aberdeen was really kicking off in the 70s. My family moved to Aberdeen for the oil industry. My dad went and worked offshore, and the remainder of his working life was in the oil and gas industry. So I grew up with it. All my friends went off to jobs in the oil and gas sector. I didn't. I kind of stood out like a sore thumb. But we did this. We did this mass upskilling in the 70s and 80s, where there was a mass sort of upsurge in jobs in the sector for oil and gas. We can do that again, but for green tech. We've got all the knowledge about, renewables, about energy efficiency, the science is there, the engineering is there. We can transition rapidly, but we need that political will in order to that to happen. It's not going to happen on its own. As Sandy says, we can't depend upon the big players in oil and gas to do anything. Because it affects their profitability. They will just go somewhere else where the rules are different. Which is actually why we need a global fossil fuel treaty, so that there is nowhere else to go. But we've done it before in terms of mass upskilling. We can do it again. But we need our politicians, we need our governments here in Scotland, but globally, to take a decision that there is going to be no more new oil and gas, and that we don't burn everything that we've got already, and that we actually sort of take that decisive action. And that means that those jobs that people have now in Aberdeen and the surrounding area in the oil and gas sector, there will be a future for them. That future will look different, but there will be a future, and it'll be a positive future contributing to tackling the problem of climate change.
I think that's really beautifully put, and there's no doubt that there's a need for that. But I think the fear locally probably is that this cancelling licenses and cancelling exploration, that has an immediate knock-on effect to hundreds of jobs that are in and around the oil industry, service companies. I was a helicopter pilot. I know there's lots of helicopter pilots. The less exploration that there is, the less people are going offshore, the less need for catering, the less need for cleaning staff, the less need for admin, the less need. And if that stops almost overnight, then people haven't got time to retrain. People haven't got time to find another comparable job. People are committed to mortgages, committed to all sorts of things. And I think the fear is that a sudden transition, which is what it sounds like in the narrative or the rhetoric that's put out there, will leave them literally high and dry.
But it can't happen immediately, and this is what we're saying. We need to, the government knows this is happening, that the end is in sight. We need to start planning for it now. So the transition runs in parallel with what we have at the moment until we're at a point that we can actually turn off the oil and gas.
And this is the idea behind GB Energy, isn't it? That Labour.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, let's hope that goes according to plan, because that's a really positive step in the right direction.
But yeah, it's entirely a failure of planning, because we've known this has been coming for 30 years. So if there are no jobs for those people to go to now, those people who are in exploration now, then that's a failure of our governments, and it's a failure of the big oil and gas companies that have been telling us for years that they're transitioning, and they haven't. So I worked in the renewables industry up until 2016, and the Scottish renewables industry at that time was phenomenal. I mean, the expertise, the knowledge, the will, the momentum was just astounding. And that whole industry was put out of work overnight by a change in in government policy on what it would fund and subsidise, and the whole industry was wiped out overnight. So if the government are not taking control, people will lose their jobs, for sure. But if the government are legislating for a proper, fair, funded green transition, then that's what we'll get. So,
and we need the stability.
Absolutely.
For that to happen. We need political stability for that to happen.
Well, hopefully we have that now, but who knows?
More so than in the past, perhaps.
Who knows?
You know, part of the problem, isn't it, that I'm going off track here, but this does, you mentioned it before, alluded to it before, that a lot of this becomes kind of background noise for people, and people do tend to switch off, I think. And how do you think, as a movement of writers, you might be able to break through that kind of psychological barrier somehow?
I wish I had the magic wand for that.
I know.
I mean, I've my background is science, and I'd learnt about climate change at school. I graduated in 1989 with a geology degree, and decided back then that I wasn't going to go into the oil industry, which would have been probably financially a smart move for me. But I assumed there was no future in it. You know, even back then in 1989, we thought there was no future. And so it's been going on that long, and we've been told that long that it's being tackled, and it's never properly been tackled. So I think people are kind of, they're numb to it now. They're numb to this talk about climate change, because we've been hearing about it for 30 years, you know. But we've been hearing about it largely from scientists who, and I include myself in that, who are talking about things like 1.5 degrees, which is meaningless for a lot of people. You know, like that's the difference between maybe inside this room and the next room, or you know, today, you know,
11 o'clock in the morning and 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Exactly. So it's meaningless. So people have never taken it that seriously. Whereas actually, as writers, we have the ability to move people in a very different way, to move people in a more visceral, emotional way. And that's one of, you know, some of the writing in our zine really does that. It really brings home the climate crisis in a very different way. So so we have the ability to move people. Can we move them in the direction of taking action, or I don't know, are we
or to vote with climate in mind,
or to vote, or to go and nag their MPs, which is what we're really keen on people doing. So can we move them? That's in that direction. I don't know. I feel like I've kind of been fighting this battle my entire life, and
don't give up. No,
I can't give up.
No, I mean on that. So I'd encourage everybody to go and check out the zine at paperboats.org, and if they are moved by some of the writing there and want to, you know, maybe do something a little bit more than just listening to the horrendous news on the topic, what can they do? What can they do to sort of get behind Paperboats, get behind the fossil fuel treaty and the Rewilding Alliance?
So on the website, there's a section on our campaign specifically, and it gives people really straightforward, simple things to do. So for the Rewilding Alliance, they can sign the Rewilding Nation Charter. For the Fossil Fuel Treaty, they can sign the Global Justice Now petition, which is asking the First Minister of Scotland to back the Fossil Fuel Treaty. Scotland could be the first country in Europe to back the fossil fuel treaty, and that would be amazing, because it would just topple, you know, it could just topple a lot of other countries in Europe to do the same. One would hope they're all thinking about it already. So it's just that momentum. So the petition for the fossil fuel treaty is really important. And then what we're also asking people to do is write letters to their politicians. Now we have this issue where people are not talking to their politicians about climate change because it's all too big and too scary, whereas actually what we're asking people to do is write to their politicians, but write about how they're feeling about it. And what we've got on our website is letter writing prompts that will ask people to connect with their feelings about climate change. What does it mean for you? What are your fears around it? And to put those into letters for their politicians, because they're not listening to the science, and actually they really need to be listening to something. So it's
the
just
concerns of their constituents, you know. And I think that you're right. I mean, we talked about the writing aspect of Paperboats, which is about moving people on an emotional level, and for people to actually sort of tap into those emotional impacts of their fears around climate change and share those with the people who represent them in our parliament is actually really important, because there's much more chance that our MSPs will listen to those emotive concerns of their constituents that they are accountable to, than they are to listen to the big drum of science, which they, as you said, they've just sort of got that now as their backbeat, and they're not tuning in to the actual melody anymore. And if people want us to come and help them in some way, then get in touch, reach out to us, and we'll see what we can do.
There you go, two very passionate ladies with a fantastic movement. And if you are moved at all, do check out the Zine and try and support the Paperboats in whatever way you can, and Sandy and Elaine will try and help you to do that if they can. So thank you both.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
I heard the beautiful promises, and sure, I'm a river, but I can take a side. From this day I'd rather keep afloat like wee folded paper boats, the hopes of the young folk chanting at my bank, fear in their spring bright eyes. So hear this, fail them and I will rise.
Paperboats supports Global Justice Now and the Scottish Rewilding Alliance. To learn more about their campaigns and Paperboats writers, go to paperboats.org.
I would like to thank Ian again for so generously sharing your story with us, and we'll definitely check out the rest of your episodes soon. You can listen to Paperboats podcast stories and writers involved in the collective on Spotify, Podbean, Apple Podcasts and YouTube. Tune in to our next crossover in a couple of weeks. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like and share it with others. It'll really help us reach a wider audience. If something exciting is happening in your own community, be sure to let us know so that we can help you tell your own story. You can drop our story weavers a line at stories@scan.scot. It's scan, SCCAN, .scot, SCOT. We also offer training and mini grant support to community storytellers. To keep up to date with our offerings and everything Scan, check out our website at scan.scot, or find us on Twitter, Facebook or Instagram, or simply sign up to the newsletter.